Hello and welcome. I'm Emily Kyle, registered dietitian nutritionist and certified holistic cannabis practitioner over at emilykylenutrition.com. And today I am sharing with you my guide on how to use my printable cannabis flower to oil ratio guide and printable chart. Now, are you ready to make cannabis butter or oil, but you're stuck wondering how much to use? My flour to oil ratio guide will help you decide how much so that your end product is perfectly potent, suited to your tolerance and needs. So I have developed this easy to use chart that will help you decide how much flour and how much oil to use based on how big you want your final batch to be. This works for infusions that are made in a crock pot, instant pot, or even an infusion machine, depending on the capacity that it can hold. Now the chart has two parts. It's a 1-to-1 ratio, so 1 ounce to 2 cups, and a 1-to-1 ratio, 1 ounce to 1 cup. But what chart should you use? One of the best parts about making infused butter is that you can make it as strong or as mild as you prefer. And if you have a low tolerance or if you're looking for a mild dose, you should use the 1-to-2 ratio chart listed first. Now, if you have a high tolerance or if you want a stronger dose, then reference the second chart and use a 1-to-1 ratio. For example, a 1-to-1 ratio if we do 1 ounce of decarboxylated flour mixed with 1 cup of butter. This will create an infusion that is twice as potent than if you use the 1-to-2 ratio. So when deciding which ratio to pick, I want you to consider your tolerance, and if you're new to edibles, I want you to be sure the golden rule of start low and go slow. As a general rule, it's essential to know that the more cannabis flower you add to your infusion, the more potent your edibles will be. You can also increase the potency by decreasing the amount of oil or butter to get the same effect. Now my flour to oil ratio chart, it helps break it down so you can easily and accurately mix the right amounts, but there are a few other factors I want you to consider. The first is the potency of the flour. Now, the amounts of flour and oil that you use matters, so does the potency of the flour you use. Cannabis flowers contain anywhere from 0 to 30% cannabinoids, or the important compounds we want like CBD, CBG, or THC. And different strains have different percentages of cannabinoids. And without lab testing, it's impossible to know this exact number. So if you purchased your cannabis from a dispensary, it should come with lab testing or a lab report or printed numbers stating the total percent of cannabinoids in the product. If you grew your flower at home and you know the strain you used, then online resources like Leafly should be able to give you an average percentage of what the strain typically produces. Now remember, the higher of the percentage of cannabinoids, the more potent the final infusion will be. Now this chart was designed with the thought that you would be using traditional cannabis flower buds. But what if you want to make an infusion with trim or shake? If you're working with trim, I do recommend doubling the amount of flour called for in the chart. And that's because trim, like fan leaves or sugar leaves, they're typically less potent than flowers, so doubling up on the amount will help you keep the potency higher. Now, of course, this is just a rough guesstimate, but it will again depend on the strength of your flour and your personal tolerance. And just know that you can repeat the exact same process if you want to work with CBD flowers to make a CBD canna butter. If you're working with keef, now again, the chart was designed for using flower buds, but if you're lucky enough to have collected a nice amount of keef, you can easily make a keef butter. Now, if you're working with keef, I do recommend that you at least half the amount of the flour in the chart, and that's because keef has the potential to be anywhere between 50 to 70% more potent than cannabis flower due to its high volume of trichomes. Now, I do want you to take care when preparing keef oil or keef butter because they can be very potent depending on how they're made and how much you use. Now, while it's no substitute for lab testing, an online calculator can help you determine the potency of your final product. Now, for this to work, you will need to know the potency of the material you're working with, or at least have a general idea. From there, you can input the values into my online edible dosage calculator to see the final potency before infusing. By changing the amount of flour to oil in your recipe, you can manipulate your final end product and make it as potent as you'd like. The more flour you use, the more potent it will be. The more oil you use, the more it will dilute your infusion. Now, because cannabis affects everybody differently, we have our own unique endocannabinoid systems, it's highly individualized from person to person, and it's really essential that you know your own unique tolerance level. Now, cannabis community members, they agree that the best way to consume THC edibles safely is to always start low and go slow. This way, you're less likely to experience any unpleasant side effects of too much THC consumption like anxiety or paranoia. And it is always advised to start with the low flower to oil ratio chart first for your first batch of edibles and see whether it meets your needs or not. If it's not as potent as you'd like, you can just try a stronger ratio next time. Now, to find the perfect ratio for your tolerance level, I want you to experiment with different amounts of cannabis and oil. Once you've got the right potency, you'll be able to make all kinds of edible recipes at home on your own. Traditionally, cannabis brownies are a fan favorite, but you can make anything you want, from cookies and candies to no-bake edibles and more. Whether you're just beginning your journey into homemade cannabis infused treats or you're a seasoned baker, I hope that this flower to oil ratio chart is a quick and helpful guide. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you found it helpful. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. And don't forget, you can get all of your favorite cannabis education, resources, and products over at emilykylenutrition.com.